She said yes to a disabled billionaire until their vows exposed a hidden truth. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us get back to our main character. It not malice. Rain drizzled over downtown Chicago, tracing silver lines across the glass windows of Brooks Bistro, a place where business deals were sealed and hearts quietly broke. Inside, the air carried the scent of roasted coffee, wet pavement, and the quiet hum of ambition. Mark Davis sat by the window, his worn jacket still damp from the cold, his hands clutching a folder filled with overdue bills. He was a law student working nights at a diner, surviving on caffeine and unpaid dreams. He had no idea that tonight, the woman waiting to meet him would change the course of his life forever. When the door opened, a wave of hushed admiration moved through the cafe. Eleanor Brooks entered with quiet authority, the billionaire CEO of Brooks Holdings. Her silver gray hair was neatly tied back, her navy suit perfectly tailored. Every step she took seemed measured, deliberate, as if the world itself adjusted to her pace. She spotted him immediately and offered a faint, polite smile. "Mr. Davis," she said, her voice calm and controlled. "Thank you for coming." Mark stood, unsure whether to shake her hand or bow. "Of course, ma'am. You said this was important?" "And is then?" "It is," she replied, sitting gracefully and gesturing for him to take the seat across from her. The waiter arrived silently, poured water, and disappeared without a word. Eleanor waited until the room settled before sliding a sleek envelope across the table. Mark looked down. His name was printed on the front in elegant cursive. "What is this?" he asked. "An offer," she said simply. "A way out." He hesitated, exhaustion and curiosity mixing in his eyes. "An offer for what?" Her gaze never wavered. "For marriage. To me." The words hit him like thunder. For a moment, he thought he had misheard. "I am sorry." "What?" "You heard correctly," Eleanor said evenly. "This is not about romance, Mr. Davis. It is a legal arrangement, a partnership. You will be compensated, and in return, you will help me protect what is rightfully mine. Is sad be in Tazen." Outside, thunder rumbled across the city, echoing his confusion. "Why me?" he asked, his voice barely steady. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," she replied. "You are young, educated, discreet, and currently drowning in debt. I also know your mother's medical bills are due next week, and that your landlord has given you 3 days before eviction. I am offering you a way to fix all of that." Mark's throat tightened. Shame burned under his skin. "So I would be your husband?" "For 1 year," Eleanor said. "No intimacy, no emotional obligations, only appearances. You will attend public events, family functions, and several press conferences. In return, your debts will be cleared and you will receive a monthly stipend." Mark tried to laugh, but the sound broke halfway. "This is insane." "Is it?" she asked softly. "Sometimes survival requires accepting the unthinkable. The Armashin with every Emmons." He looked at the envelope again, the golden edges gleaming under the warm cafe light. Everything inside him screamed that this was wrong. Yet deep down, a voice whispered that maybe it was his only way to save his mother and himself. Eleanor stood, smoothing the front of her suit with calm precision. "You have 24 hours to decide. Bring your answer to my office tomorrow at 10. She turned to leave, her perfume lingering in the air like rain on glass. Mark sat frozen, the envelope still untouched on the table, his reflection staring back at him from the window, an exhausted man on the edge of a decision that would change everything. Outside, the rain kept falling, soft and relentless, as if the city itself was holding its breath. The next morning, the sky over Chicago hung heavy and gray, pressing down on the city like a secret waiting to break. Mark Davis had barely slept. The envelope from Eleanor Brooks still sat on his kitchen table, its crisp edges glinting under the weak morning light. He had read it 3 times during the night, every clause, every signature line. 1 year. A public marriage. Monthly compensation. Full debt clearance. Termination with confidentiality. Each sentence felt like a lifeline tied to a chain. He rubbed his tired eyes and looked around his small apartment. The walls were bare except for unpaid bills taped near the door, reminders of everything that had cornered him into this decision. His mother's hospital called again that morning. The nurse's voice was kind but firm. The next treatment could not wait. By 7:30, Mark knew what he had to do. At 9:59, he stood in the marble lobby of Brooks Holdings. The air smelled of polished stone and power. Men in tailored suits moved like currents through the space, their footsteps echoing against the walls of glass and chrome. Mark's jacket, still creased from the night before, made him stand out like a misplaced shadow. The receptionist gave him a curious look before softening her tone. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" "Yes," he said quietly. "Mark Davis. Miss Brooks is expecting me." Her hands moved quickly across the keyboard. "Top floor, executive office. Good luck, Mr. Davis." The elevator doors closed behind him with a soft chime. As it rose, he caught his reflection in the mirrored panels. Nervous, underdressed, a man on the edge of a life he did not understand. His heart pounded louder with each floor. When the elevator opened, a woman in a navy pencil skirt was waiting. "This way, Mr. Davis. Miss Brooks is ready for you." They just to get her in righty, in Astor 10 self from the wearability. And in Saren's Falaman, Eleanor's office looked more like an art gallery than a workplace. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline, and a single white orchid stood on her desk beside a stack of documents. She did not rise when he entered. Her eyes lifted from the papers with calm precision. "You are early," she said. "I made my decision," Mark replied. His voice was quiet but firm. Her gaze flicked to the folder in his hand. "And? I will do it." For a brief moment, something flickered in her eyes, not triumph, not satisfaction, but something like recognition. She opened the folder on her desk. Inside were 2 copies of the contract, the same clean lines that had haunted him all night. "You have read everything carefully?" she asked. "Yes." "Good," she said. "Then sign both copies." Mark picked up the pen. His hand trembled as the tip met the paper. The sound of the pen scratching across the page filled the quiet room. When he finished, Eleanor turned the pages toward her and signed her own name with perfect strokes. The motion was elegant, practiced, final. She closed the folder and looked at him. "Welcome to our arrangement, Mr. Davis." Mark exhaled, unsure if he should feel relieved or trapped. "Should I call you Mrs. Davis now?" Her lips curved faintly. "Not yet. The ceremony will be this evening. It will be small, private, and efficient." "Efficient," he repeated almost to himself. "I do not waste time," she replied. "My attorney will handle the legalities. You will be provided with attire and transportation." That afternoon, a black sedan arrived at his apartment. Inside was a neatly pressed suit and a small note, written in her elegant handwriting. "Wear this. Do not be late." Hours later, Mark stood inside a quiet courthouse, the smell of rain and paper thick in the air. The clock above the judge's bench ticked steadily. Eleanor arrived moments later, flawless as ever in a pearl-colored dress. Her calm presence filled the room. The officiant cleared his throat and began. "Do you, Eleanor Brooks, take this man, Mark Davis, to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," she replied, her tone steady, her eyes unreadable. "And do you, Mark Davis, take this woman, Eleanor Brooks, to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Mark hesitated only a heartbeat. "I do." The officiant signed the certificate and handed the document to Eleanor's lawyer. The entire ceremony lasted less than 10 minutes. No music, no flowers, no vows of love, just ink, paper, and silence. Eleanor extended her hand toward him. "Congratulations, Mr. Davis. From this moment forward, you are my husband. I expect punctuality, discretion, and respect. You will be compensated on the 1st of every month." Mark shook her hand. Her palm was cool, steady, impersonal. "Understood. Then let us begin." Outside, the rain had returned, thin and relentless. A chauffeur opened the car door, and the vehicle glided through the city toward the northern suburbs. The silence between them was thick but not hostile, just heavy, like unspoken rules settling into place. When they arrived, Mark stared out the window. The Brooks estate loomed behind wrought iron gates, its columns of white stone glowing faintly under the evening lights. It was not a home. It was a statement. Eleanor stepped out first. "Welcome home," she said quietly. Mark followed her inside. The foyer was enormous, the air faintly scented with jasmine and polished wood. Portraits of stern ancestors lined the walls, each one watching like a silent witness. A housekeeper led him upstairs. "This will be your room," Eleanor said. "Mine is down the hall. We will maintain separate quarters." "Of course," he said softly. "Dinner is at 7. We will eat together when required for appearances. Otherwise, you are free to occupy yourself." When she left, the silence wrapped around him. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the plain white walls, the rain still whispering outside. On his hand, the new wedding ring glimmered faintly in the dim light, a reminder that his life now belonged to a contract signed in gold ink and cold resolve. And for the first time, he wondered whether the deal that saved him might also be the one that would break him. The next few days moved like clockwork. Every hour in Eleanor Brooks's world had a purpose, and Mark Davis quickly learned there was no room for hesitation. Breakfast appeared at exactly 7:30, meetings filled the rest of the day, and dinners, when they happened, were more like rehearsals than meals. Every word, every movement, every smile had a function. He felt like a stranger in a play he had never auditioned for. The mansion itself was silent most of the time, as if even the walls respected Eleanor's discipline. She spoke little, but when she did, her tone was calm and final. Her schedule was printed and pinned to the refrigerator by the staff: meetings, charity luncheons, press appearances, and social events. His name appeared beside hers under "spouse," attendance required. One evening, as they prepared for their first public event together, a charity gala downtown, Mark stood awkwardly in front of a mirror. The tuxedo fit perfectly, a gift from her stylist, but he felt like he was borrowing someone else's reflection. Eleanor appeared at the door, flawless in a navy evening gown. Her silver hair caught the light like frost. "Are you ready?" she asked. "As I will ever be," he replied. She studied him for a moment, her gaze softening slightly. "You do clean up well, Mr. Davis. Remember, tonight is about perception. We are not here to enjoy ourselves." The drive to the gala was quiet. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the wet pavement. Inside, Eleanor's perfume filled the air. Subtle, cold, expensive. Mark watched the reflection of passing skyscrapers in the car window, wondering how many people in those towers would trade everything just to feel free. When they arrived, cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters shouted her name, microphones stretched toward them. Eleanor stepped forward with a practiced smile, her hand slipping lightly into his. The warmth of her touch startled him. "Smile," she whispered without looking at him. "You are a husband tonight." They moved through the crowd with ease. She greeted investors, laughed at rehearsed jokes, and answered questions about corporate expansions. Mark stayed close, nodding when required, his role clear, silent support. But as the evening unfolded, he began to notice something beneath her composed surface. When the crowd was not watching, her shoulders lowered just a fraction, her eyes unfocused for a second too long. It was not arrogance that surrounded her. It was armor. During a brief pause near the balcony, Mark handed her a glass of water. "You make it look easy," he said. "It is not," she replied quietly. Her eyes drifted toward the city skyline. But people believe what they are told often enough. For a moment, the tension between them shifted less about duty, more about recognition. Then the sound of approaching footsteps broke the silence. A tall man in a tailored suit walked toward them with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Eleanor," he said smoothly. "It has been a long time." "Richard," she greeted, her tone cool but polite. "You remember my husband, Mark Davis." Richard's eyes flickered with surprise, then amusement. "Husband? You do move fast." He turned to Mark. "Congratulations. I did not think she believed in marriage." Mark forced a polite smile. "Life surprises all of us." The conversation lingered with invisible edges. When Richard finally walked away, Eleanor's hand tightened slightly around her glass. "That was my ex-fiancé," she said flatly. "He prefers to appear civilized." Mark hesitated. He seemed interested. "Do not mistake curiosity for respect," she said, her voice low. Then, almost to herself, "People like him measure everything by profit, even affection." For the rest of the evening, Mark stayed close. He played the role she needed him to play, steady, reliable, unflinching. When a reporter asked about their whirlwind romance, he smiled and said, "Some things cannot be planned." By the time they returned to the mansion, the night had deepened into quiet rain. Eleanor removed her earrings and set them on the dresser, her reflection pale in the mirror. "You handled yourself well," she said without turning. You did not embarrass me. That is good to know, he answered lightly, though I am still not sure who I am supposed to be. Eleanor paused, her eyes meeting his in the mirror. For now, she said softly, you are exactly who I need you to be. The siddle map a siddle mattery sent. Guard passant in the motions. She turned off the light and left the room. Mark stood alone for a long moment, staring at his own reflection. The tuxedo still looked perfect, but the man inside it felt less certain than ever. Somewhere between her world and his own, a line had blurred and he was no longer sure which side of it he wanted to live on. Days turned into weeks, and the arrangement between Eleanor Brooks and Mark Davis began to take on a strange rhythm. Every morning, he woke to the sound of the staff moving through the mansion, the faint aroma of coffee drifting through the halls, and Eleanor's quiet voice somewhere in the distance, already working before sunrise. Their marriage was built on rules clear, sharp, and unbreakable. But somewhere between the silence of shared meals and the polite exchanges in passing, the edges began to soften. One evening, Eleanor invited him to a charity dinner at a country estate outside Chicago. It was one of those events filled with crystal chandeliers, polite laughter, and people who smiled with their teeth but not their eyes. Mark wore the same black tuxedo that had come to feel like a uniform. Eleanor, in a silver gown that caught every flicker of light, moved through the crowd like she was born to rule it. He stayed a step behind her, watching how she carried herself graceful, precise, untouchable. Yet every time their eyes met across the room, something unspoken passed between them, something that had nothing to do with the contract they had signed. During the dinner, a reporter from a business magazine approached them. Mrs. Brooks, she said cheerfully, your marriage surprised everyone. What made you finally settle down? Eleanor's expression never changed. Stability, she replied, and perhaps timing. The reporter turned to Mark. And you, Mr. Davis? What is it like being married to one of the most powerful women in the country? Mark smiled. Challenging, he said honestly, then added, but never dull. The table laughed, and for the first time that evening, Eleanor's mouth curved into a real smile. It was small, but it reached her eyes. Later that night, as the orchestra played, Eleanor and Mark were asked to dance. It was supposed to be for the cameras, a staged gesture to reinforce the illusion of affection. But when his hand found hers, the noise of the ballroom seemed to fade. You do not have to pretend so hard, she whispered, her voice just loud enough for him to hear. Maybe I am not pretending, he said quietly. Her eyes met his, uncertain for the first time. For a moment, the distance between their worlds felt smaller. When the music stopped, applause filled the room, breaking the spell. Eleanor stepped back quickly, her composure snapping into place like armor. Thank you, Mr. Davis, she said evenly, and turned away before he could answer. On the drive home, the car was silent. The rain had returned, tapping softly against the tinted windows. Mark glanced at her profile, the faint reflection of city lights dancing on her face. She looked calm, but her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. I did not mean to make things uncomfortable, he said finally. You did not, she replied without looking at him. You just forget the boundaries sometimes. Maybe that is because they keep moving, he said. Eleanor turned her head slightly, her expression unreadable. Do not mistake civility for closeness, Mark. This arrangement works because it is defined. The moment we confuse it, everything falls apart. In anyone dard. It's sadder. He nodded, but her words lingered long after the car stopped at the mansion. That night, unable to sleep, Mark stepped out onto the balcony. The garden below glimmered under the drizzle, the fountain's soft murmur echoing through the dark. From the hallway behind him came the faint sound of piano keys. He turned to see Eleanor in the living room, seated at a grand piano he had never seen her touch before. Her fingers moved slowly, hesitantly, tracing a melody that sounded fragile and lonely. For the first time, she did not look like a billionaire CEO or a woman made of stone. She looked human, tired, wounded, and beautiful in a way he had never noticed before. He stood in the doorway, not wanting to interrupt. When she finished, she looked up, startled to see him there. I did not know you played, he said softly. I used to, she replied, before I learned that silence was safer. And once if you are to sit down since 7, Mark hesitated. It does not have to be. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable, then turned back to the piano. Good night, Mr. Davis. He stood there for another minute before walking away, the sound of her quiet music following him down the hall like a memory he could not escape. Weeks passed, and what began as a transaction slowly turned into something neither of them could fully define. Mark Davis continued to play his part as the dutiful husband in public, but behind closed doors, the lines between obligation and emotion grew increasingly blurred. Eleanor Brooks remained the same, precise, controlled, and endlessly composed. But there were cracks now, small glimpses of vulnerability that slipped through when she forgot he was watching. Some mornings he caught her standing by the window long after sunrise, staring at nothing. Other nights she worked until her shoulders trembled, refusing to admit exhaustion. Mark began to help in quiet ways, leaving tea on her desk, fixing a lamp in her office, waiting for her car at midnight after board meetings. She never thanked him. Not directly, but her silence carried a different weight now. One Friday evening, they attended a fundraising gala for a children's hospital. The event was held in a glass atrium overlooking the city skyline, filled with reporters, investors, and socialites. Eleanor was radiant as always, but Mark noticed how tense she was. Her fingers tapped lightly against her champagne glass, a tell he had learned meant she was uncomfortable. Midway through the event, an older woman approached them, smiling sweetly for the cameras. "Eleanor, darling," she said in a voice dripping with courtesy. "You always manage to surprise us. A husband from nowhere? So romantic." Eleanor's polite smile held steady. "Romance is rarely planned," she replied. The woman's smile sharpened. "Or believable." Mark felt the sting in her words. He stepped forward before Eleanor could respond. "It is believable when it is real," he said calmly, his voice firm but even. The woman blinked, taken aback. "Of course," she murmured, retreating with a forced laugh. Eleanor turned toward him, her eyes flickering with something close to gratitude, but she said nothing. Still, the smallest smile appeared at the corner of her lips before she turned away to greet another guest. Later that night, after the event, they rode home in silence. The air between them felt different, warmer, fragile, real. When the car stopped at the estate, Eleanor hesitated before stepping out. "You did not have to defend me," she said quietly. "Yes, I did," Mark replied. "No one should speak to you like that." She looked at him for a moment, then nodded once, as if committing the moment to memory. "Good night, Mark." But the night was not over. An hour later, Mark was in his study when he heard voices down the hall, Eleanor's and another man's. He followed the sound to her office door, which was slightly open. Inside stood Richard, the same man from the previous gala, her ex-fiancé. His voice was low but sharp. "You really think this performance fools anyone?" Richard sneered. "You married a man half your fortune's worth to protect yourself. Do you think the board will not see through that?" Eleanor's tone was icy. "You should leave." "Not before you hear this," Richard said, tossing a folder onto her desk. "You can hide behind your husband all you want, but this will end your company." Mark stepped forward then, his voice steady. "That is enough. Is the next time." Richard turned, startled. "Ah, the husband. Do you even know who you married?" "Yes," Mark said firmly. "And I also know a bully when I see one." For a moment, the room went silent. Richard smirked, then brushed past him on the way out. "You will learn soon enough," he muttered. When he was gone, Eleanor sank into her chair, her hands trembling slightly. Mark picked up the folder, but she stopped him. "Do not," she said softly. "It is not your burden." He set it down anyway, his voice gentle. "You do not have to face this alone." She looked up at him, her defenses lowering for the first time. The exhaustion in her eyes told him everything her words would not. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, quietly, she said, "I have not trusted anyone in a very long time." Mark nodded. "Then maybe it is time you start." Outside, thunder rumbled again over the city. Inside, for the first time, Eleanor Brooks did not feel entirely alone. The next morning, the mansion felt different, quiet but tense, like the air before a storm. Mark Davis could tell something had changed. Eleanor Brooks had retreated into her office before dawn and had not spoken a word since. The door stayed closed, the sound of her phone calls echoing faintly through the hall. At noon, a headline began spreading online. "Brooks Holdings under investigation. Anonymous source leaks marriage contract." The words glared from every screen. Mark's phone buzzed with notifications, but his stomach sank before he even opened them. Someone had leaked their secret, the contract, the terms, even the date it had been signed. Within hours, the media had turned it into a spectacle. Every news channel ran the same story: the billionaire who faked love to protect her empire. Paparazzi gathered outside the mansion gates. Reporters camped along the driveway. Mark found Eleanor standing in front of the large living room window, her face pale, her posture stiff. The glow of the phone in her hand illuminated the fury and exhaustion in her eyes. "It was Richard," she said flatly. "He had the documents. He wanted revenge, and he got it." "What are they saying?" Mark asked quietly. "That I married you to manipulate my shareholders. That I fabricated affection for sympathy." She laughed bitterly, but there was no humor in it. "They call me heartless, and you—" She stopped, looking down at the phone again. "They call you a paid companion." Mark's jaw tightened. "Let them talk." Her eyes lifted to his. "It is not that simple. The board wants me to step down. The foundation is already distancing itself. Everything I built is collapsing because of one decision. And member porting mass des fiem." Mark took a step closer. "Because of me." Eleanor shook her head. "No. Because I thought I could control everything." For the first time, she looked small in her own home, dwarfed by the very walls that had once symbolized her success. Mark wanted to say something to comfort her, but before he could, her assistant rushed in, breathless. "Ma'am, the press is outside the gates. They are demanding a statement. If you do not respond, they will make their own story." Eleanor inhaled sharply and straightened her shoulders. "Then we will give them one." Mark followed her outside. The sky was gray, heavy with rain, and the flash of cameras exploded like lightning when the front doors opened. Microphones shot forward. Voices shouted questions. "Miss Brooks, is it true your marriage is a business arrangement?" "Mr. Davis, how much were you paid to marry her?" "It is pastored." Eleanor stood at the top of the steps, silent for a moment. Then she said, "Yes, there was a contract. Yes, it began as a transaction. But what they do not tell you is that I did not buy loyalty. I found it." The crowd murmured. Mark stared at her, stunned. "I made a mistake believing I could live without trust," she continued, her voice rising above the noise. "This man beside me did not come from my world, but he has more integrity than half the people who claim to stand with me. He did not sell his soul for money. He gave me back mine." The flashbulbs went wild. Mark took her hand instinctively. She did not pull away. When they turned to go back inside, Eleanor's breathing was shaky, but there was a steadiness in her eyes that had not been there before. "That will not stop them," she said quietly. "No," Mark admitted, "but at least now they know who you really are." Is not right in Malsis. Inside, chaos waited. Her phone rang again, her legal team on speaker. "Eleanor, the board is meeting tonight. They are calling for a vote to remove you as CEO." "Let them," she said. "If I built this company on lies, then it should fall." Mark watched her as she hung up. For the first time, the cold precision in her voice was gone, replaced by something raw and human. As evening fell, the mansion lights dimmed, leaving the two of them alone in the quiet glow of the study. Rain streaked the windows, matching the rhythm of her uneven breathing. "I do not regret marrying you," Mark said softly. Eleanor looked up, surprised. "Even after all this?" "Especially after this," he said. "You showed me that strength is not about control. It is about honesty." She looked at him for a long moment, and then slowly, carefully she smiled. Not the polished, practiced smile she gave to the press, but something fragile and real. "You are a terrible liar, Mark Davis," she whispered. He laughed quietly. "Maybe, but I am a loyal one." She reached for his hand then, the first real gesture of warmth since the storm began. "I am not sure what happens next," she said. "Then we face it," he replied. "Together." Outside, the flashes of the cameras had finally faded, replaced by the steady sound of rain. For the first time since the deal began, their silence was not cold, it was honest. And somewhere in that quiet, the lines of their contract began to blur into something deeper, something neither of them could have planned. The night stretched on in heavy silence. The rain had stopped, but the echoes of the scandal lingered like a shadow over the Brooks estate. In the soft light of the study, Eleanor Brooks sat alone, a glass of untouched wine beside her, staring at the headlines spread across her tablet screen. Her empire was unraveling in real time. Mark Davis stood by the fireplace watching her. "You should rest," he said quietly. "There will be no rest tonight," she replied. Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled slightly as she scrolled through the endless stream of articles. They are voting now. By morning, I will no longer be the CEO of Brooks Holdings. Mark moved closer. Then let them take the title. It does not change who you are. Eleanor looked up, her eyes weary. You do not understand. This company was my life. Every hour, every sacrifice, every choice I made was for it. Without it, I am nothing. Mark shook his head. You are not nothing, Eleanor. You are the woman who built something from the ground up when everyone said you could not. You are the one who stood in front of the press today and told the truth. That is not nothing. Her gaze softened, but only for a moment. Truth does not save companies, she said bitterly. It destroys them. Before he could respond, the sound of a car engine broke the silence. Headlights flashed through the window as a black sedan pulled up outside. Eleanor frowned. It is too late for visitors. Moments later, the butler entered. Ma'am, Mr. Richard Blake is here. He insists on seeing you. Mark's jaw clenched. I will handle it. But Eleanor rose. No, this ends tonight. She walked into the foyer with measured steps, her silk robe trailing softly behind her. Richard stood by the door, rain still dripping from his coat. His smirk was gone, replaced by something darker. You look tired, Eleanor, he said. I saw your press conference. Touching, really. But it will not save you. You leaked private documents, she said coldly. You committed a crime. Richard shrugged. Maybe, but the damage is done. The board has already voted. You are out. Mark stepped forward. You came all the way here just to gloat? Richard glanced at him. I came to collect what is mine. Eleanor's shares revert to me once she is removed. That is the clause her late father added to protect the company from emotional decisions. Eleanor's eyes widened. You planned this from the start. Richard smiled thinly. I warned you, love. Sentiment is weakness. For a moment, the room was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock. Then Eleanor straightened her shoulders. You may take the company, Richard, she said, but you will never take what it stands for. He laughed. And what is that? Pride? No, she said firmly. Integrity. Mark stepped beside her, his voice steady. You built your legacy on fear and manipulation. She built hers on respect. That is why people will remember her and forget you. Richard's expression hardened. You two deserve each other, he spat. Then he turned and stormed out into the night, slamming the door behind him. The echo faded, leaving only silence. Eleanor exhaled shakily, leaning against the marble column. Mark reached for her hand, but she pulled away. I lost everything, she whispered. No, he said gently. You lost control. That is not the same thing. Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away. I do not know who I am without the company. Mark's voice was quiet, almost tender. Then maybe now is the time to find out. That passant, j'en réussi to the drio. She looked at him, the weight of exhaustion and heartbreak etched into every line of her face. For a long time she said nothing. Then finally she whispered, What if I cannot? He smiled faintly. Then I will remind you. Outside, the storm had passed, and the first faint streaks of dawn began to appear on the horizon. Inside the mansion, surrounded by the ruins of everything she had built, Eleanor Brooks took her first unsteady breath of freedom. By morning, the storm outside had cleared, but the storm within Eleanor Brooks had only begun to settle. The city skyline glowed under a pale sunrise, the light catching the rain-soaked glass of her office tower, now a building she no longer owned. News outlets confirmed it. Richard Blake had officially taken control of Brooks Holdings. Eleanor read the headline once and then set her phone aside. Her hands were steady now, her expression calm in a way that felt new. She was no longer a CEO under attack. She was simply a woman who had nothing left to hide. Mark Davis walked into the room carrying 2 mugs of coffee. They are saying Richard will give his first press conference at noon, he said. He plans to rebrand the company under his name. Eleanor took the mug and smiled faintly. Then he will also take the blame when the truth comes out. Mark frowned. What truth? She reached into a drawer and pulled out a small silver flash drive. This, she said, before the board vote, I compiled every record, every fraudulent transaction Richard authorized while he was still part of the company. I did not release it because I wanted to protect the shareholders, but now, the only person it will hurt is him. Mark looked at her in disbelief. You had this the whole time? In Dane. Informant. I did, she said. But revenge was never the goal. Accountability is. He nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. Then let us finish this the right way. A few hours later, Eleanor stood in front of a row of cameras again, but this time, she faced them not as the disgraced billionaire, but as a whistleblower. Her voice was clear, measured, and unwavering. I am no longer the head of Brooks Holdings, she began, but I will not stand by while corruption destroys what honest people built. The man now running this company profited from deceit and betrayal. I have the evidence to prove it. She handed the flash drive to a federal investigator, waiting beside the podium. Reporters shouted questions. Flashes lit up the air. But Eleanor stayed composed. The truth cost me everything, she said, and I would pay it again. The next day, headlines shifted. Richard Blake under federal investigation. Brooks Holdings faces criminal audit. The same cameras that once called Eleanor a fraud now praised her courage. Mark found her later that night, sitting on the balcony of the mansion, watching the distant lights of downtown Chicago. The air was cool, carrying the scent of rain and earth. You won, he said softly. Eleanor shook her head. No, I did not win. I simply stopped pretending. He sat beside her. That sounds like freedom. She smiled faintly. Maybe it is. For a long while, they said nothing. The city moved quietly below them, alive and endless. Then Eleanor spoke again, her tone gentle. You could leave now, you know. The contract ended when the company did. Mark looked at her, the corners of his mouth lifting. That may be true, but I am still here, and I am not staying because of a deal. Even Saria man, little Dar. Her eyes met his, searching for deceit but finding none. Then why? She asked. Because somewhere between your lies and my mistakes, he said, we found something real. Eleanor laughed softly, the sound fragile but free. You are impossible, Mr. Davis. And yet, he replied, you have not asked me to leave. She turned toward the horizon where the first stars began to appear. Maybe because for the first time, I do not want to be alone. Mark reached over and took her hand. This time she did not pull away. The wind carried the faint hum of the city, blending with the rhythm of her breathing. The empire she built was gone, but in its place stood something far more honest, a beginning not written in contracts or headlines, but in trust. Eleanor Brooks had lost her company, her fortune, and her reputation. But as she sat beside the man who had once been a stranger and was now her anchor, she realized she had found something she had never owned before. Peace. 2 months later, spring arrived in Chicago. The city that once whispered her name in scandal now barely remembered the chaos. Brooks Holdings had been dissolved and reorganized under federal supervision. Richard Blake faced trial for fraud, and his empire of deceit collapsed in full view of the world. For Eleanor Brooks, the silence that followed was not emptiness, it was healing. The mansion no longer echoed with the sounds of staff or business calls. Most days, the only sound was the quiet turn of pages from her books, or the laughter of children from the nearby park drifting through open windows. She had sold her downtown penthouse and donated much of her wealth to the hospital her foundation once supported. Mark Davis still lived in the guest room down the hall, though neither of them called it that anymore. Their arrangement had ended, but neither one had left. What began as obligation had grown into a kind of quiet companionship that no contract could define. One afternoon, they sat together at the small garden table behind the house. The cherry trees were beginning to bloom, scattering petals over the stone path. Eleanor poured tea, her movements slow and deliberate. It feels strange, she said softly, not to live by a schedule. No meetings, no shareholders, just mornings and evenings. It suits you, Mark replied. You finally look like you can breathe. She smiled faintly. I never realized how much of my life was spent performing. Every smile was strategic, every word rehearsed. Now I wake up and wonder who I am without all of it. He looked at her thoughtfully. You are someone who survived what most people never could. You lost everything the world thought mattered and still managed to keep your soul. Eleanor glanced down, stirring her tea. And you, Mark Davis, have a way of making failure sound poetic. Maybe because it is not failure, he said gently. It is freedom disguised as loss. She was quiet for a long moment, then whispered, You stayed, even when the world mocked us. I told you I would, he said. Besides, you still owe me a dance that was not for the cameras. She laughed softly. You remember that? I remember everything, he said, standing and offering his hand. The late afternoon sunlight spilled through the trees as she rose and placed her hand in his. They moved slowly, without music, just the rhythm of the wind and the faint hum of city life in the distance. When they stopped, Mark held her hand a little longer than necessary. You know, he said, the first day we met, I thought you were the coldest person I had ever seen. Eleanor smiled. And now? Now I know you were just protecting something fragile, he said. Your heart. Her eyes softened. And what about yours? He smiled. It stopped being mine the day I signed that contract. For the first time, Eleanor did not look away. She leaned forward, brushing her lips against his cheek. It was not the dramatic gesture of a billionaire or the staged kiss of a public image. It was real, quiet, and full of gratitude. Thank you, she said, for seeing me when no one else did. Always, he replied. As the sun dipped behind the skyline, Eleanor Brooks stood in her garden, her hand still in his. The empire she had built was gone, but something far greater remained: dignity, peace, and the beginning of love that asked for nothing in return. And for the first time in her life, she did not feel like a CEO or a survivor. She simply felt human.